This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on trade relations between India and China. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the India-China bilateral trade and the deficit that exists between the two nations. India's Commerce Secretary Anup Wadhawan was recently in Shanghai to attend the China International Import Expo, and there were talks between India and China where India has also urged China to give its products more access to the Chinese market. Ambassador Sajjanhar, when you see this trade deficit between India and China, and it's huge, it's a little over $51 billion as of today, how does this impact the overall relationship, and what does India and China both need to do to somehow bring this down?
Two or three things here I would like to say. Number one, we say that the figure is about $51 billion last year. That for the first time bilateral trade increased last year. It went above $80 billion. For the last many years, it has been stagnating at around $70 billion. So when it became about $84 billion, then it was seen as a big progress, big advancement. Also, it was mentioned, particularly I think by the Chinese media and the Chinese official circles, that last year India's exports to China increased by about 40%. And this was shown as a huge achievement, as if it's a big increase. But if you look at it in real terms, it increased really from about $11 billion to about $16 billion. While the imports have also increased, not by such a large percentage, but that is because the base has been very high. So as you said that last year, some figures tend to indicate that the balance was that the trade deficit that India had with China last year was about $51 billion. I have also read figures, Simran, which suggest that last year the trade deficit was about $64 billion. So we'll have to see which is the more accurate of these two figures. But that having been said, whether it is $51 billion or it is $64 billion, both these figures are so huge that it is unsustainable. It is unviable. And in fact, that has been an issue of discussion between India and China for the last many, many years. Commerce Secretary Anup Wadhawan was there in Shanghai. He met his counterpart, the Vice Minister for Commercial Affairs of China, and he again very strongly put this point of view that there are so many products from India in which India has comparative strength. We are competitive, our qualities are very good, we are exporting it to the rest of the market. China is a big market for those products, but because of the non-tariff barriers that China imposes on imports from India, that we are not being able to supply them. Just to give you an example, one is, agricultural products. For instance, India is one of the largest suppliers of rice in the world. And you would recall that when Prime Minister Modi met President Xi Jinping in Wuhan on the 27th-28th of April, at that time it was decided that India would be permitted to export non-basmati rice to China. So this is an area where some progress has taken place, some meetings have taken place. There have been traders and importers from China who have come to India, who have been to, I think, about 20 processing units where rice is processed and exported. That gives a very good possibility, a very good opportunity for Indian exports to China to expand. The other, of course, is sugar, because sugar also India produces different varieties of sugar, and it is exported to different countries in the world, while our exports to China are negligible, non-existent. So that is also an area where it can be done. So in that sense, whether it is agricultural products or it is pharmaceuticals or it is information technology enabled services or it is tourism, these are all the areas that Mr. Wadhawan put forward to his Chinese interlocutors, that these are areas where they should allow market access to goods and services from India.
The latest figures that we have regarding the bilateral trade between India and China, the figures suggest that it stands at $84.44 billion, and that is seen as a record high between the two nations. One, we have this huge trade deficit. We have India asking for greater access to Chinese markets. The bilateral trade does seem to be growing between India and China. Yet one senses a bit of tension, a bit of conflict when it comes to the India and China trade issues. Do you feel that the trade issues somewhere tie to also the political situation? Political tensions are there between the two nations, and that feeds into the trade part. Would you agree with that?
I would say that it is the trade issue which also further tends to exacerbate the level of political distrust or lack of confidence between the two countries. I think if China were to make an effort to enhance, to ratchet up imports from India, for instance, and I think India has told China in no uncertain terms that these high trade deficits are totally unviable. If you look at India's total overall global trade deficit, it is in the range of about $100+ billion. That means close to 40 to 50% of our global trade deficit is accounted for by China, meaning it is something similar to what, to the sort of situation that the United States is facing with China, which has a total global trade deficit of about $800 billion, out of which about $375 billion last year in 2017 was with China. Similarly with India. So if this trade deficit were not that high, and if China were to take some concrete steps to lessen this trade deficit, I think this will go a long way in improving confidence and trust between the two countries, and that will help to settle some of the anxiety and worry and the tension between the two countries.
As you touched upon the China-US deficit, and we also see that the China-US trade war is maybe at a record high again. We have the US President Donald Trump unleashing policies which are making the Chinese a little nervous, a little more aggressive in the market. China is responding in its own manner. When you look at the global situation where you have these two really big economies, the Chinese economy and the US economy, engaged in this trade war, how does this impact India and the Indian economy, especially given the fact that India has trade relations with the US, it has trade relations with China. Not only is India trying to maintain them, India is also trying to have growth in both these sectors.
No, absolutely. I think, of course, we tend to say that it is the arrival of Mr. Trump as a result of which these trade wars have come about. But, if you look at the genesis of the problems that Mr. Trump has said United States has with China, even during his election campaign, he always used to call China a currency manipulator. And he always used to say that China is stealing the American jobs. After that, they have also maintained that there is inadequate protection of intellectual property rights by China. The other is that China is giving on the promise of access to its domestic market, it is forcing American companies to share their technologies. So these are sort of accusations which have been coming thick and fast, and that is why the United States has not even agreed to give the status of a market economy to China, because it says that when China was made a member of the WTO in 2001, it has taken the benefit and advantage of sending its exports to other countries, but it has not played by the rules because it has not opened up its own market. So I think there are problems which, even if after Mr. Trump leaves, I think similar policies could continue, because in the United States we see that there is a unanimity between Democrats and Republicans in terms of what action or what policy stand they should take as far as China is concerned. Now, as far as India is concerned, we could try to take advantage, because if Chinese products are not going to the United States, as we see so far, Mr. Trump started in July. He imposed penalty tariffs on $34 billion. In August, he imposed penalty tariffs on further $16 billion. And in September, on $200 billion. That means on $250 billion, there are additional tariffs that have been placed by Mr. Trump on goods coming in from China. Now, in those areas, India could definitely try and see what are the possibilities, what are the areas where we have some strengths, where we could make an entry. And similarly, as far as China is concerned, China has also imposed penalty tariffs on goods coming from United States to the tune of about $50 to $60 billion. And so we can also try and see. But of course, as far as China is concerned, I'm sure we could do much better if their NTBs, the non-tariff barriers, were reduced. So we can try and take advantage. But here I would like to sound a note of caution. And that note of caution is that under these very unpredictable and uncertain situations, foreign trade, foreign investment, production, that does not, get encouraged. Because investment, production and trade is looking at wants that there should be stability as far as trade relations are concerned. The point that I would like to make here is that if we get a chunk of the American market and there are additional facilities that we set up in India to meet that demand, and suddenly tomorrow the relations between India and China again become normal, then these products that these manufacturing units that we have set up, they will really not be able to have the market in the United States on the basis of which they had made this investment decision. So I think we need to be cautious about it while taking advantage of the emerging opportunities. Also see as to how things are going to evolve and develop in the coming months and years.
As you explained about the Chinese economy and the tariffs that they place on products, and this is something they've been doing to every country in the world. How do you think one deals, not just India, but I think it's a problem which globally almost every country faces. How do you deal with an economy like China, which one is really strong globally, but at the same time they have their own rules by which they play. They don't really play by the free market rules that the United States economy plays with, and India also more or less sticks with the free market rules. But this is something that China internally, of course, does not do. And even on the global stage, when it interacts with other economies, India's economy, the US economy, other economies, it is not really sticking to these rules. When you have a situation that one major player is not really sticking to the rules, then how is India expected to still get its foot across inside the Chinese market and manage this trade deficit and the trade relationship?
This is a very important question because, we have seen that China has evolved into a manufacturing hub of the world. The reason for that is, as you said very rightly, that it is not the market rules and the market obligations, the free market principles that it should follow according to the provisions of the World Trade Organization, but it does not do that. And that is why, it is not the free market players who are taking decisions on the basis of the existing circumstances in the markets. Most of their manufacturing enterprises are the state-owned enterprises, the SOEs as they call them. And there is, in terms of the subsidies that are provided to these enterprises, which are hidden, which are not really covered by the WTO rules per se, not only India, not only the United States, but the world, Europe, Japan and others need to go together is to pressurize China to follow the rules and obligations that it has accepted under the WTO. And once it starts observing that in terms of providing subsidies, in terms of dumping its products, in terms of, the sort of wages that is providing to its own people, then I think there will be some sort of a level playing field. And then the countries will be able to compete suitably, and whichever country has a better comparative advantage, competitive strength, that is the company that will be able to have an edge in the export and imports.
Thank you.
You are listening to a discussion on trade relations between India and China. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.